Hey, welcome to my first Facebook Live. My name is Keith Baldwin with Baldwin Success Coaching. We focus on helping entrepreneurs, small business owners create the teams that they've always dreamed of. And most of us who start businesses, we have this dream of creating this entrepreneurial freedom, and we hope to focus on growing profits in our business, but sometimes we get so bogged down in problems with our team or not knowing how to really bring our team forward or develop our team that we get a little bit lost, and then that becomes really a frustration point for a lot of entrepreneurs. And so that's the area that we focus on. And truthfully, I didn't used to be care that much about high performing team members, because I used to be a pretty mediocre team member. In fact, about 20 years ago, I was one of those people that were really pretty disengaged at work, pretty unhappy, disillusioned. And hi, Liz, glad you joined us. So when I look back over that time, it really was a transition point for me, because I was pretty much coming home every night depressed. And at work, I was hanging around with all sorts of people, and we were all basically feeding on each other's dissatisfaction at work. And so we managed to through talking a lot about how bad things were at work, we pretty much brought down the mood of everybody around us. And so I was going through this period of time, and finally came home one night, and I was just in a bad mood. I'd worked late, and not an excuse, but I was just every day coming home and bringing my frustrations out on my family, my wife and my kids. So I get home one night, and my wife, Cindy, said, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" She's always cheerful. And I responded with, "How in the F do you think my day was?" Not a great response, but I was just furious, kind of stormed past her, go back to the bedroom, and I'm taking my suit off and tie off and stuff. And Cindy came in and said, "Hey, what was that all about?" And I said, "Well, I hate my job. I mean, why would you ask me how my day was when you know how much I hate my job?" So we got into this big discussion, I like to call it. And finally, Cindy was crying and pretty frustrated, and said, "Just quit. No job is worth being this miserable for. Just quit. We'll sell the house, we'll get an apartment, we'll get rid of one of the cars, we'll be fine. I just want you to be happy." So I went to sleep that night thinking, okay, I'll just quit. But I woke up the next morning thinking, quit and do what? And for me, that was a transition point of starting to study, how do you create motivation, happiness at work? And at first it was just for me, because I was trying to figure out, how do I be happy and motivated at work? Because I knew that if I just quit, I'd go to another job that I wouldn't like, pretty much the same. And since then, I've found out that most of Americans suffer with this same thing, this idea about being disengaged at work. And over my 20-year study of this topic, I found that not only wasn't I alone, but I also started to uncover some of the reasons why so many of us are so disillusioned at work. I want to talk about just a few of those today. It's like thinking about, so why are they so unhappy at work? And let's just start with this topic of, why do the best people quit? Because sometimes in a company, we'll have a couple high-performing team members, but statistically, the likelihood is about 7 out of 10 employees in a large team are not going to be engaged at work, not really going to care that much about work. And so just thinking about that, a lot of times when you have this unhappy culture, the very best people, the cream of the crop, they end up being the ones that actually leave, the ones you want to stay. So why do they quit? Well, it turns out that there's probably a lot of reasons, but it really comes down to a couple that I think are really worth focusing on. And the cool thing about this is that you can focus on these today. You can start this transformation in your company today. But first I want to kind of dispel a myth, because a lot of people have this idea that people quit because of money, they're not earning enough. And while that certainly could be a factor with some people, the research around money and motivation is pretty fascinating. And what people have found is people will quit or be disengaged or unhappy at work because they're paid only to the extent they feel they're being treated unfairly. Early on in my career, there was this process where we all pretty much got the same raise, year after year. And so it'd be kind of frustrating for those of us who are working long hours and really volunteering for extra efforts, to see people who maybe weren't willing to do anything extra, or who left early, came in late, getting the same raise as we were. And so certainly pay had an effect, but only to the extent of looking at were we treated fairly when it came to compensation. So that's one thing to look at with your team members. Are they being treated fairly within the compensation system for the work they're putting out? You know, if you're managing each person differently, separately, are these people being treated fairly? But that's just kind of a small piece of the puzzle. Something you can't ignore, but not really the main thing. Truthfully, I think the major reason that some of the best team members quit is they're ignored. Yeah, that's right, they're ignored. In fact, I one time heard Ken Blanchard, you know, the author of The 1 Minute Manager and so many other great leadership books, he talked about the seagull method of management, the seagull method of management. And he said in America we have this epidemic of managers who basically, you know, circle around like seagulls up above all of the team members that are doing the work. And they pretty much ignore them until somebody messes up, then they swoop down, crap on them, and then take off again. So kind of a graphic description, but sometimes that's what happens, even if it's unintentional, because sometimes business owners are so busy with all the things that they're focusing on, all the things that are on their plate, and they have so many stresses, a lot of times working on things that maybe they shouldn't even be working on, and they pretty much ignore the team members who are doing the work. And that's exactly the opposite. In fact, if you leave nothing else today, leave this video with nothing else today, but just think about, don't ignore your best performers. You know, it's interesting, when Gallup did research around employee engagement, they found something really interesting. Team members who received positive feedback, so strength-based method of feedback, you know, holding them to high standards, but consistent feedback, perform the highest or most likely to be highly engaged at work. But interestingly enough, people who receive negative feedback, in other words, are criticized all the time, they actually are more engaged than people that receive no feedback. So let me say that again. People who receive no feedback from the management or very little feedback from their management, those are the ones most likely to be disengaged and also can be the ones most likely to leave your company. So ignored team members is going to be one of the worst things for your company. But it's going to be a natural tendency, because if you got John and Sally and Jane over there and they're basically doing their work and keeping everybody happy, then like why bother with them, because they're doing their job, right? We have this mental management thing about, hey, I'm just paying people. If I'm paying them, then they should be doing what I'm paying them to do. But that's not going to be the case. So we want to make sure that no one's being ignored. So the second piece, and this relates back to this idea about being ignored, is one of the reasons that people stay at a company, or conversely they might leave a company, is this sense of that they're growing, that they're developing, and that they have hope for their future. Like, you know, we have all these sayings that are kind of sad in America, you know, another day, another dollar, you know, TGIF, thank God it's Friday, you know, Blue Monday. So we have all these things that kind of illustrate that so many employees in America really don't want to be at work. Where as a business owner, we want them to be highly engaged at work. We want them to be passionate about what they're doing, serving our customers. We want them to be, you know, motivated and inspired about their work, because that's going to translate into everything for how the team is going to operate. But unless they have a sense of hope for their future, that what they're doing today is going to lead to a better future for them for tomorrow, you know, eventually their lack of excitement and engagement is going to start dwindling. So it kind of goes back to that first one about making sure people aren't ignored and having conversations with them on a continual basis to help develop them. And third thing I'd like to talk about just briefly, and it's pretty closely tied, I think, to these first two, but is this idea about do we have a sense to contribute to something bigger than ourselves? You know, there's so many like stories out there, you know, this idea about that when we're building something bigger than ourselves, that we develop a sense of purpose. And so purpose is certainly a sense or a piece of how team members feel that what they do really matters. So I'm not just answering the phone time after time, you know, resolving customer complaints, or I'm not just picking up the phone and calling people to try to schedule appointments to make sales. I'm actually contributing to something bigger in their lives and in the company's life and in the team's life. And so helping team members start to see how their little piece of the puzzle, what they do every day, how that contributes to something much bigger than themselves, becomes a powerful piece for keeping people engaged and wanting to stay longer. So hopefully that makes sense. And just to recap, remember the one thing I was hoping you'd take away from what I talked about today is this idea about making sure that nobody on your team feels ignored, whether they're getting the work done or whether they are the ones that maybe are causing problems on the team. Make sure that everybody is getting consistent feedback on a weekly basis. And so what can you do? Right now, go to your calendar and send out invites to each one of your team members and schedule a weekly developmental discussion with them. Eventually, you could probably go to monthly with that, but if you have not been doing that for a long time or never, start with weekly. And really the purpose of these discussions is pretty simple. You just want to check in with your team members. And I know that can be frustrating because I've had clients before tell me, hey Keith, I'm happy to have these discussions with my team members, but gosh, they I don't know what to say because I have these meetings. I've tried that before, and I sit down with them and I go, hey, how you doing? I'm doing fine. Anything to do to help you? No. And okay, so now what do I do, right? And so a big piece on those discussions is just kind of approach them knowing that at first your team members may not be that excited about them because it's something new, but just start off with some simple open-ended questions. The how, what, where, why type questions. It's like how are things going? And they're probably going to say, hey, things are going great. What can I do to get things out of your way to help you perform better, or help you make sure things aren't getting in your way from doing your best work? Things like, tell me about the best day you've ever had here, or the best day you've ever had at any job. Tell me a bit about that. And just start asking some questions like that to help team members start to think through how they can perform at their highest level, and also open up the conversation to that you're there to support them. So many team members really haven't had anybody paint a picture of what success looks like for them. And so your role as the entrepreneur is to paint what does success look like in their position, and based upon that person, how can you help them be successful? So schedule those weekly meetings and start to make sure that you're having some consistent developmental meetings with each one person on your team. Don't overcomplicate it to start with. If you're having the meetings with their best interest at heart, both for the team member and also for your organization, then you're probably going to find yourself doing the right thing more than the wrong thing. It kind of reminds me of this book that I read years ago when my children were teenagers. It was called something like Mom, Stay Out of My Life, but First Will You Drive Sally and Me to the Mall. It's something close to that. And my big takeaway from that book on raising teenagers was, if you do the best you can with love in your heart, wanting to do the best thing you can for your child, that you're not going to be perfect at it, but things are going to come out okay. And the same thing with thinking about how do I help my team members succeed? Like how do I help each one of them individually at first, but then collectively, how do I help them succeed? If you approach it with love in your heart, with knowing that you have your team member's best interest at heart, that you want to help them rise to the highest level possible based on who they are, and you approach those conversations in that way, you're going to find yourself saying and asking the right questions. Second thing, I also learned this from Ken Blanchard years ago, is this idea about catching people doing things right. So this just means being really observant. For some people, this will be really natural. For other people, if you're one of those checklist people, you may need to put each one of your team members on a checklist and just kind of check a box, that I caught them doing something right this week. And just be very observant about any steps your team member takes to get them close to the right direction, right? This isn't about them all of a sudden transforming and being this whole new employee overnight. This is about the small steps that lead them in that direction. And so just start observing your team members very purposefully, catch them doing things right, and then be very specific when you point that out. Just like, hey Keith, really noticed you're on the phone with that upset customer and you had such a calm voice. I really appreciate the time you took with them, because I know that probably was challenging for you. Just want to let you know that was awesome work. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, it's better if it's not complicated. All you're trying to do is just catch people doing things right. So really the recap of the whole recap is don't ignore people. Try to catch people doing things right, and then have some consistent conversations with them. So one way of remembering this is don't be a seagull. So hey, I'd really be interested to kind of hear your feedback. And so just down below this video, add some comments like, what's your best boss story ever? Like, you know, this video is kind of about like why people quit, but share a bit about your best boss story ever. Like maybe you had a boss, as I certainly have, who kept you there beyond maybe the time that you thought you would quit. You know, right around this time when I was starting this transformation, I was so lucky to go to work for a lady who I've always called my best boss ever, my BBE. And a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about in these videos and some of the stuff I've talked about here, you know, both based on the research, but also my observations of my best boss ever. And so think about your best boss ever. What did you learn from them? And share down below this video so we can all learn from it. And I'll be back on Thursday, actually, at 12 p.m. Pacific. This time I'm going to flip this around a little bit. I'm going to talk about why maybe bad team members or team members that you wish would quit, why don't they quit? So I'll be back at Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks for joining me. Take care. Bye.